Great. So that recording has started now. As I said, we may just give people another few minutes to drip in, but yeah, 37 people so far is not too bad. We should as well, I think, have John Nichols along today, who's the president of the Tutors Association. I think he said he might say a word or two, to whatever extent. So should be coming along to that.
Hi, Fionn. Yeah, I'm here, but
John,
mostly
how you get on?
I'll stay quiet and let you let you get on with stuff. And obviously, if people have got particular questions you want to refer to me,
you can obviously talk because I'm not.
Yeah, as I was saying, if there's any particular questions you want to refer to me, Fionn, then I'm happy to do that.
Absolutely, that'd be great, John. Yeah, as I said to you beforehand, I'll try and keep them focused on software. And obviously, you've been the Tutor Association have been on the ball in terms of conversations with Bays and your understanding of the regulation, all that kind of stuff. So I'll defer to your expertise on that. It probably warrants its own conversations, though. So I'll try to keep it focused on TutorCruncher's changes. Tell you what, yeah, we've got a good few people now. Numbers don't seem to be increasing massively, so this is probably as good a time as any to kick off. Just to reiterate what I said to a few of you at the start of the call, yeah, if you could keep yourself on mute during the call, I'll go through a general overview. As questions occur to you, just type them into the group chat, and my colleague Ben is going to keep an eye on them, and we'll just chat through those questions afterwards as they appear in the group chat. All right. So just to kind of give us a general overview of why we're here today, I'm sure we all saw the email and the various emails that have gone out over the last few months in relation to the High Court ruling EWHC 2461, which has been all the talk for the last 6 to 9 months. And this is specifying whether or not companies are going to act as employment agencies or employment businesses, and the implication that has on what they consider the revenue to be. So, general overview: an employment agencies would consider their revenue to be the commission amount on lessons, so the difference between what the client is paying and what the tutor gets paid. An employment business considers their revenue to be the full amount, and that has implications, obviously, for things like that. So, in order to facilitate people who want to act as EAs, TutorCruncher has developed split payments to be in line with the regulation for what you have to do if you're an employment agency. I should just clarify before I go on, because we've had a few questions from people. If you choose to continue working as an employment business or go down the employment business route, that's absolutely fine from TutorCruncher's perspective. It's not a requirement that we have. I know we've been talking about employment agencies a lot over the last few months, but we're agnostic as to what path you go down. So if we've had a lot of these conversations about employment agencies, it's not a reflection on what choices we recommend that you make. You can make either choice, and you can use TutorCruncher just as well in either way, in either direction. So yeah, to run over the most recent set of changes, that most recent email that went out, I'm going to go through the points in roughly the same order that you saw them in that email. So one of the big important changes in this recent batch is the fact that the tutors are going to have control over the invoicing process, and those invoices are now going to be sent on a per lesson basis. So some of you might have been used to this already. TutorCruncher had a tool anyway called Auto Invoice, which sent invoices on a per lesson basis already. This is broadly very similar to that. For those of you who've been doing batch invoicing once a month or once every 2 weeks or however you've done it, it's going to be a bit more of a transition. Essentially how it works is when a tutor is marking a lesson as complete, and say they write their lesson report afterwards, they're going to be presented with a screen when they're saving that report saying, are you happy for the client to be invoiced for this lesson? If they click yes, then along with the lesson report goes out the charge. If we have the person's card on file, and you have auto charge turned on, we'll just take that money off their card automatically. And they're getting that on a per lesson basis. That means that there's not going to be any big breakdowns in the emails anymore, which cover the cost per lesson, because there's only going to be one lesson per email anyway. Yeah, and that's it in broad strokes. To facilitate this, because I understand that some people had concerns about, say, people who didn't have their card saved, racking up a few different unpaid invoices. In the next day or two, we're going to be releasing a reformatted invoice page, which will show people their unpaid invoices. So if they do have a few piled up there, we'll show them their unpaid invoices when they're paying any one of them. And yeah, the other aspect of this is that tutors having control over the billing process in that way is that both tutors and the agencies themselves are going to have control over voiding invoicing and or issuing refunds. So again, within the context of this, of treating someone operating as an employment agency, and I should also clarify, you might choose to have different parts of your business, different wings of your business operating as an employment agency versus operating as an employment business, without confusing things. I'm just talking about the employment agency side of things. If that's the case, the tutor is sending out these invoices themselves, and the tutor and the agency can void and refund those. If the invoice is unpaid, both the tutor and the agency only have the option to void it or issue credit note. You'd probably be used to the terminology in TutorCruncher. If the invoice has already been paid, then the only option for, again, either tutor or agency is to refund that charge. Now, if the tutor wants to refund a charge, they're going to need to have some kind of positive balance in their Stripe account. So some of you will be familiar already using split payments. Tutors get payments into a Stripe balance that they then gets drawn down into their bank either once a month or when they do it manually or something. If they want to issue a refund to a client for their cut of a lesson, they're going to have something in their Stripe balance. They're going to have that amount or greater in their Stripe balance from which we could draw from. If they don't have that amount and they still want to refund something, they're just going to have to send a bank transfer or do it some other way. That should be quite rare, because if they don't have balance in their Stripe account at the moment that it's necessary, they probably will in the near future anyway. But just to clarify the process on that. If an agency wants to refund a payment and the tutor doesn't have balance in their Stripe account, then the agency will have a choice as to whether they want to not process the refund and just sort something out specially via bank transfers, or they can refund the full cost of the lesson if they choose to, if they want to take a hit on it. Not ideal, but based on the situation, might be useful to have in the back pocket. That's pretty much it in terms of the tutor's control of invoicing. Obviously, going to be lots of questions around that. That's absolutely fine. I'm sure Ben's lighting up on the chat already. One thing that leads on from that are the changes that we'll be making to the email. So if a lot of you have been using split payments already, you will be used to an email that breaks down the charges in the body of the email itself. That doesn't have to have any PDF attached to it, and you don't have to log in to see the PDF breakdowns. The changes will be, because these emails are going to be per lesson anyway, they will have a total amount to pay for that lesson. So it's not going to have the big breakdown because it's not going to be multiple lessons on it. Another important note here, which is different from how we've operated split payments up until this point, has been that, or is that, clients will be able to access the PDF breakdown kind of one way or another. So your options on that, as you probably have seen before, if the client can log in, then they can log in and see the PDF. That's as it has been. If you choose to attach the PDF, as you either have chosen or chosen not to do up until this point, then they see the PDF. What's new is that if you turn off client login and you turn off whether or not the PDF is attached, so both of those are off, they'll get a separate link appearing in the email, which is a no login necessary link, which brings them through to a page that has the PDF breakdown on it. And that breaks down the full flow of funds. So that's the amount that's going to your agency and the amount that's going to the tutor. So that's generally it. Also of note, the email is going to come from the agency's email address, or can come from the agency's email address. So that doesn't have to change. What will change is the logo, company logo will be removed, both from the email itself and from the PDF, which breaks down the charges. So yeah, lots of questions, I'm sure, on tutors control and the email itself. In terms of general overview stuff, continuing on, and I should say, clarify when talking about this, these changes are coming into effect on February 2nd. So I mentioned the fact that everything that I'm speaking about is for when an agency is acting as when a company is acting as an employment agency. Now, maybe that's for specific clients, in which case you currently have a toggle on a client level where you can select whether or not you're acting as an employment agency for them. So you can check that out now. If you go into the setting, if you edit a client and you go into their accounting settings, you see a note there about whether you're treating this client as though you're an employment agency with them, or you have a relationship with them that's an employment business relationship. You can access that now. If you turn on employment agency, all those changes that I've been speaking about, they're going to come into effect. And if you go to employment business, none of this stuff is relevant. Those are active now. These changes themselves will only go live on February 2nd. So you're just choosing now which clients you want to work with and what way you want to work with them. And then on February 2nd, all the big changes will go live. So in addition to all this stuff around the invoicing process and around the email itself, we are also introducing the option to take bank transfers for these payments, because we understand that a lot of people don't want to pay by card, or it's not an option for them, particularly I'm thinking about maybe corporate customers, schools, that kind of thing. So allowing for bank transfers is going to work in a similar way to, many of you will have been using Stripe up until this point. You'll have seen a little pay by card link in the email that they follow through and they pop in their card details. It's going to be similar with bank transfers. They're going to have a button in the email to pay. If you allow the client in particular, and you can toggle this on a per client basis, whether or not you allow them to access bank transfers. If you allow both bank transfers and Stripe and card payments for that client, then they'll have an option. Do they go pay via bank transfer, or do they fill in their card details and pay via Stripe? Or if you don't allow Stripe, if you only allow bank transfers for that user, then they just have the option to pay via bank transfer. The bank transfer will bring them through to a page with transfer details, so account number, sort code, that are unique to that client. So that client has to take note of whatever bank details are presented with there. They send off their bank transfer, they use their app, or they go on a website or whatever. When that money comes in, TutorCruncher will use it to write off against the oldest invoice that is outstanding on their account. So if they have a £200 invoice from a week ago and they send in £200, we'll just write off £200 against that. So that's fine. One of the things that complicates that slightly is that we don't have control over the fact that they type in £200. So they may or they may, in 99% of cases, I'm sure they're going to type in £200. If they don't, so let's say they type in £180, we're just going to mark that invoice as partially paid. So that's fine. That's not particularly unusual. There'll still be 20 to pay, but they'll pay it another transfer. They'll pay it some other way. If they instead say transfer 250, when the oldest invoice that is unpaid in relation to their account is £200, TutorCruncher will refund the remaining £50 back to them. So that won't hit your accounts. The payment will come in. We'll use 200 to pay off the oldest invoice, and then we will refund the remainder £50 to the client. And yeah, as I said, you will be able to choose on a client-by-client basis whether or not they have this option to send a bank transfer. It's going to work like some of you will be familiar with AutoCharge. Like AutoCharge currently is in TutorCruncher, you can tick a box in settings for whether or not your default is that you want to use AutoCharge or not use AutoCharge. But we're going to have an override option per client. Again, if you edit the client profile, it's going to be under accounting settings, and there's going to be an override for override or general settings. Yes, we do want this person to have access to bank transfers, or override the general settings. No, I do not want this person in particular to have access to bank transfers. So you can control that on a client-by-client basis. So that's bank transfers in a nutshell. And then the last important change that we're going to make. So everything I've spoken about so far is for this February 2nd launch date. What I'm now going to talk about is not for February 2nd, because these are changes to our card fees. So we're going to give people a bit more time on that. And these are going to come into effect on April 1st. The changes are the one that's probably going to be the most interesting for the purposes of this conversation is a 0.15% increase to the cost for anything that's processed using split payments. So that's as it is. Basically, if you're currently paying, say, 2.3% on your transfers for split payments, those payments will now cost you 2.45. And this is different from the general prices for if you're using this new Stripe setup, but you're not using split payments. If you're not using split payments for something, you keep it 2.3. If you're using split payments for it, in that case, you'd be 2.45. Now, there's some other card fees as well, which are particular to the type of cards that you're accepting. You may have seen before what we already had for our split payment setup was that American Express cards, Amex cards, are charged an extra 2%, just because Amex is ferociously expensive to process, unfortunately. You have a choice at the moment already as whether you accept Amex cards or not. So again, that remains. What we're introducing with these changes, though, is that processing international cards will have 1.5% added on top of that. So yeah, you will also be able to control whether or not you accept international cards, just like you can control that with Amex. But if you process the international cards, it would be an extra 1.5% on top. So that largely covers the top-down approach. As I said, again, those changes to card fees are only coming in from April 1st, not from February 2nd, like everything else I said. Yeah, and then I'm sure there's a Rake Questions that Ben has been doing a good job of looking through. Anything interesting, Ben?
Yeah, of course. We've actually got a lot of questions come in there, and thanks to John as well. You're doing a smashing job getting back to some of them as well. Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll just go through pretty much all of the questions that will come in, and myself and Fionn will chat through them. And if there's any questions as well, keep firing them in and we can try our best to get through them. So yeah, one of the first questions was, does Bayes rules apply for students and tutors based abroad? And basically the answer to that is yes. If your business is registered and operates in the UK, then that ruling does still apply to you as well. And then why did the recent changes get announced for system changes? Basically, after we made the initial announcement, why did we then decide to roll out another announcement on those changes? And basically, the simple answer for this is we're just staying up to date with what was recommended by Bayes, and we're trying to facilitate that pretty much in the platform as quickly as we can. And that's why we've set the date for February next year, is to try and ensure that we get the features built and out on time. And we're just trying to keep up to speed as well, pretty much with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, I should have clarified that at the start. You're absolutely right. So the recent changes, the reason for the recent changes were updated conversations with Bayes. As I said, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. John is absolutely the man for that, and the Tutors Association have been very good at having those conversations and hammering out the appropriate process. Unfortunately, TutorCruncher doesn't have. This is us responding to those changes rather than making changes of our own accord. But yeah, in terms of the specific changes, as Ben said, John is the man to go to.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Now, this is obviously a very important question, I think, is most people's concerns. Can agencies help tutors chase invoices if you're acting as an employment agency? And it's obviously a fundamental question, and it is quite important to most businesses. It's a yes and a no answer. So for agencies, for your agency's cut, you can, yes, but you can't go for the tutors component of that as well. And that's generally the rule of thumb here, is you can pursue what's owed to you, but you can't get too involved with the billing process itself if you're acting as an employment agency.
Yes. So just to bring it down to TutorCruncher features specifically, you'll be familiar with things like invoice reminders that you currently send out via TutorCruncher. That won't change. You can still remind customers of an invoice. That's not a problem because the customer also needs to pay you. So reminding them of paying that invoice is fine. You're reminding them to pay you the charge that you're charging them. So that's okay. It's just, so it's kind of almost slightly in the phrasing of the question that seemed to come across, was that it's not that you're necessarily reminding them of the payment to the tutor, if you know what I mean. So it's not the tutor's invoice that you are overseeing, but the fact that your payment is tied to that invoice anyway is perfectly legitimate reason, at least by as far as my understanding goes, for chasing it up.
Yeah, and yeah, we'll keep getting through. It's great that you're throwing in questions. We're trying to we'll keep going through these as best we can as well. Another obviously good question is, has there been a response to clients receiving emails after every lesson? Now, this is kind of a tricky one because firsthand we wouldn't have much feedback or experience from that. Generally speaking, this is going to be the route forward pretty much if you are acting as an EA, as it will need to be the tutor that's basically deciding when to issue those, and it would be on a lesson by lesson basis. Now, in terms of that, it just means that there's going to be two birds with one stone here, because there's a similar question that someone put in with regards to tutors marking lessons as complete. It just means consistently tutors will be able to stay on top of those lessons and invoice them as soon as they can once they have been completed. And we do have an email definition. So the other question was, is there a way to notify tutors or let them know that they have outstanding lessons? We currently do have an email definition that gets sent on a daily basis. That's basically a reminder to mark lessons as complete and write reports pretty much. So we currently have that at the moment, and that would be sent on a daily basis to tutors as well. So although the responsibility will be passed to tutors to issue those invoices, they do get daily reminders as well that will keep them up to date on what's outstanding and what they basically need to submit as well.
Yeah, so the reminder I think currently goes out after one day has passed since they had a lesson that they haven't marked as complete. But just to further that point as well, and the concern about getting multiple emails, I completely understand that. I would say, like I said, this new feature is quite similar to auto invoicing, which we've had for quite a while. So we have quite a lot of companies who've been doing this auto invoicing, so this like per lesson invoicing for a good few years, and haven't had too many issues with it. I don't know if that applies to the person who asked the question. I know a lot of companies anyway will send out a report after each lesson regardless. So if you're sending out a report anyway, it's not an increase in the number of emails a client is getting. We also have, in particular, just I'll mention them because they've been very good to speak about it. So the profs have moved on to this per lesson invoicing recently, and you might have seen in the email, I think we included some like a very short little testimonial video from them about how they found it. But the reports from them have been pretty good so far in terms of they've seemed to have enjoyed being less involved in the billing process and just having it going on in the background, and seems to have reduced their admin work, which is a good sign. And yeah, as I said, we've had people doing similar stuff for quite a few years. Understandable issue. If we can think of ways to reduce that being an issue, we'll definitely give it a try. But that's where we're at so far, I think.
Yeah. And also linked to that as well, an important one is another question relevant to this is it the tutor's responsibility to handle disputes going forward as well? And that's also something, correct me if I'm wrong, but going forward, tutors will have the ability from their side to basically issue refunds. And that will pretty much be the overarching component to that as well, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. On the so on the refund front, as long as the tutor has balance in their Stripe account with which they can make their portion of the refund, then they can issue a refund. Yeah, could it be an issue that they go off their own bat and refunding things? I find it difficult to imagine that coming up too much. Absolutely could be wrong. But yeah, they will have the authority to do that if they choose to.
Yeah. Another question just on the actual billing side of things. So what happens when card payments fail and who gets notified of that as well? So yeah, this would be similar to how you currently do your billing as well. If there's any card payments that fail or anything like that, I think it's in your daily updates email that you get as an admin that you can see what charges are processed and if there's any unpaid invoices, I think you get notified as that as an agency as well. So that's a typical email definition that you'd have, and that information is generally included in that. Another one is, who does the charge email come from?
Sorry, I might just jump in on card payments fail, because we can alert admins too of payments as they fail, as Ben said, but also we have an email that will go out to a client if we had their card details on file and we we're trying to charge it, but then the card details fail. We'll send an email saying notification of the failure of the card charge. Your card hasn't worked. Please click here to go in and pay it manually. And then the same thing happens with the card reminders. So if that has remained unpaid for X days, then we send the reminder again and we try to get them to get in and add their card details themselves, add fresh ones.
Thanks for that. And this is relevant to what you were saying as well, Fiona, earlier about logos being sent out. Basically, who does the charge email come from? Is it from the tutor or is it the agency's email?
It's the agency's email address. It's fine. Obviously, if you haven't set it up, then it can come at sis@tutorcruncher.com. But yeah, if you have your email domain set up within TutorCruncher for emails to come from you, then the invoice email can come from your email address.
Perfect. I think another question was, will tutors see the full amount clients are being charged?
No, they won't. So obviously clients can have access to where the flow of funds is going, but from a tutor's perspective, the only relevant point to them is how much they're charging, how much they're getting paid for the sessions. What you charge the client then is a separate transaction, so the tutor has no oversight over that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And there was a question relevant to someone just curious about if you're considering the employment business model and you're using TutorCruncher. If you are considering going down the EB route, there's basically, you don't have to sign up for Stripe Express in order to do split payments. Basically, you can continue to use the system as is if you are acting as an EB. You just need to ensure that you have your tax rate set up correctly and that you are charging that on the full amount of those lessons as well. But this whole conversation arching around these changes is relevant to employment agencies that need to implement split payments. and make sure that you're operating above board.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go in as an employment business, none of these changes are going to be requirements for you. There's still going to be options. So if you still say want to do split payments because you don't want to do payroll or whatever else, or maybe you want to do bank transfers that you can set up with these new Stripe accounts that we've set up for people, you can still attach those and you can still work with them. At some point, we're going to be rolling everyone onto them anyway. But the important point is that if you're operating as an employment business and you're clarifying that you're considering that whole lesson amount to be your revenue, then you have a lot more options as to whether you use this billing process or you do your traditional one, or people just send you bank transfers, you take checks in the post or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. And there was another question I just seen there in the chat. Will tutors still only be able to pay themselves out once each month on Stripe? So tutors will be able to get paid twice. So there is an automated date that they can set, and that will happen every month that they automatically get paid out from their Stripe payout account to their bank. But they can also request one manually as well. So they technically can get paid out twice a month, and that's when the funds are available within their Stripe payout account as well.
Yeah, exactly. So they have their automatic one, which will be set by default to be, I think, the last day of every month, that they'll get an automatic payment from Stripe to their bank account. They can change the date at which that happens automatically. So let's say you do you're doing invoicing earlier in the month or something, and they want to change it. If they want to move it earlier in the month for themselves, they can change that setting within Stripe and say that they want their automatic payout on the 15th instead of the 30th. And then, as Ben said, they get one manual drop down per month. So if it's coming to the end of the month, they want some cash, but they still have to wait a little while for the automatic one, they can just draw it down manually and then get a manual transfer into their bank.
Exactly. There's just a question there. What happens when the tutor enters a lesson and the specific client is not on split payments? If basically at any point the client is following the EB model in their profile settings, then it just means those invoices will be processed like normally in TutorCruncher via the employment business model. You need to ensure that in order for invoices to be split, that the client has that enabled in their profile settings going forward, and that the tutor has an active payout account assigned to their TutorCruncher profile as well. They kind of need to have all of those factors in order for split payments to take place. As soon as you decide the client is going to be an EB model, then it just means those invoices will be processed as normally. Yeah,
exactly. So they don't see the breakdown in the full breakdown of transfer of funds and everything in their PDF, as long as they're marked as you relating to them as an employment business. They don't see that breakdown. You don't have to do the same. A tutor has full control of the billing process stuff. Those are the main things. I suppose you're not paying your extra 0.15% for the split payments.
That's another question there as well. Does this apply to tutors with non-UK bank accounts too? Yeah, that's quite a good question. So tutors can still, I'm right in saying tutors can still sign up for those Stripe payout accounts, even if they don't necessarily have a UK bank account, but they just need to ensure that their address matches that of the bank account. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, we spoke about this a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? So they can, I should double check this, and we can put some information around this in an update. They can be based abroad and have a foreign bank account, which like aligns with the company the country in which they live. So the address has to match, basically. So if they're based in Germany, they have to have a German bank account. If they're based in France, have to have a French bank account. I think in that situation, it's fine to operate that way, but that there is some small extra charge on transfers that are made to the tutor. I have 0.1% in my head.
I think it's 1%. Yeah.
Is it 1%? Okay. Yeah. So I have 1% in my head. We should double check that, and we can stick it in an email because important information, obviously.
There's another good question there. Will you be making a video of the process from the tutor end, and will you be creating emails to explain the change? Yeah, that's a great suggestion. We can make sure that we have a look into that and make sure that tutors have a full understanding of it as well. We currently do have something called a tutor's guide as well. So similar to the guides that you can access as an admin, we specifically have one called Tutor's Guide. Now, I'm sure I've chatted to quite a few of you and just relayed that on. It has a full breakdown of all the steps needed to sign up for Stripe Express and how to get paid and billing and stuff like that. But that's definitely something we can have a look at as well and get that done within the next week and hopefully send that out. No problem. Do we need to select EB or EA as a setting in TutorCruncher? That is, yeah, come February, you will basically need to select if you're acting as an employment agency. If you are basically acting as an EA and an EB, you'll still need to have that employment agency setting checked in your accounting settings. And then that gives you control on a client level then whether you want to do it individually to set them as an EB or an EA going forward as well. So yeah, you will need to set that. If at any point you want to do split payments, you'll need to ensure that you have that setting checked.
Yeah, if you want to use split payments for acting as an employment agency, just to clarify, you can use split payments and continue to act as an employment business. So the two aren't necessarily the same thing. Obviously, most people who are probably going to end up using split pay are going to use split pay because it allows them to act as an employment agency. Just to clarify that, yeah. So they're going to be different controls. You're going to have that overall setting, as Ben said, for I am going to be acting as an employment agency at least sometimes. And then you're going to have a per client toggle to say, oh yeah, with this client, my work with them is done as an employment agency, or my work with them is done as an employment business.
Exactly. Just having a check through the questions here. Will we be notified when a tutor requests a refund? That's a good question.
I don't know if we currently have an email alert from that. I'm sure we must have something, but I'm afraid I have to double check that. I'm sure there must be some kind of alert, or I'm not sure of the process on it now. I don't know if we're able to get if we can get some quick feedback from the devs while they're on this call. I'll try to do that and give you an update on it. I'm afraid I can't give you a specific answer now, though.
There's a good question from Alex. If clients asks and tutors agrees to be invoiced for a block of lessons rather than per lesson, is that possible? From my understanding going forward, sending invoices in bulk isn't something that would be in the pipeline in the coming future. Invoices will be issued as each lesson, basically as each tutor decides to send those charges for each lesson. It is something that we may consider further down the line, but in short term, there won't be an option for tutors to bulk send all of those, so the client only gets one email or one invoice.
Ben, it's probably worth that I add something there, because it gets tricky if you're going to start invoicing tutors. If tutors and companies are going to start invoicing in advance of the tuition being delivered, it's possible, but you need to make sure that your contracts that you have with the client are completely watertight. And obviously, if you're an employment agency, that gets even more complicated, because there's two contracts that the client will have. One will be a contract with the tutor directly, and one will be a contract with the agency by virtue of the fact that they're paying them for the introduction. Both contracts would need to reflect that, and you would need to also cover any regulations in relation to deposit payments. So you can, in theory, but you must make sure that contractually it's represented, and obviously there must be really clear terms in those contracts around what happens if those lessons are cancelled and on what time frame they're paid back. Obviously that then gets a fair bit more tricky. So you can get legal advice, or you can come to TTA and we can give you legal advice. Obviously, if you're members, then we can give you some advice in that respect. But yeah, it gets much more complicated.
Thanks for that, John. That's very helpful. And yeah, for those of you who missed the introduction earlier on, John is the president of the Tutor Association, so we're very lucky to have him on the call. Just to add to that, in a very kind of nuts and bolts kind of a way, in relation to the bulk invoicing, if we were to do bulk invoicing in TutorCruncher, if we were to enable that for tutors, for example, what we couldn't do is then break down the lessons that are involved in that without showing the transfer of funds, specifically to the tutor and to the agency. So I don't know. So obviously that introduces complications with it as well. And it seems like these kind of conversations have to keep going, of course. But yeah, it's just another consideration, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks. Just having a check through as well. Will the chat questions be available with the recording too? Yeah, I'll make sure that on the video that we upload, I'll try to get all of the questions put on that as well. I think I've seen a question there is, when does this take effect? Is this, yeah, when does the law come into force? Sorry, is it the 1st of January or the 1st of February? So it will be the 1st of January when this comes into effect.
The law, so just to clarify, Ben, the law is already in force now. So technically speaking, if one of your tutors complains you're not following the law properly, you could be prosecuted tomorrow. Obviously, the law has been in place since 1973. It just didn't anticipate Stripe existing and all the other stuff that has happened since then. TTA members have got an exemption from any investigations until the 31st of December. That's at the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate's discretion. But that basically means that if you are a TTA member, they won't investigate you until that date at least. If you aren't a TTA member, then potentially you can get investigated tomorrow, but unlikely in practice because there's quite a lot of tuition companies and EAS basically have a good relationship with us where they trust us to start fixing this with the sector now. So yeah, the law is in place now. Obviously, your agencies are far more likely to be inspected if you actually have a complaint. So if you're dealing as an employment agency now today, and one of your tutors complains that you're not doing it properly, then you're open to being investigated and getting one of the various forms of enforcement that EAS has at its disposal.
That's very helpful, John. Thanks.
I presume the question as to why they're only coming in from the 1st of February is because they take time to develop, but I will leave that to you guys.
Oh, yeah, sorry. And so in terms of, as I said, these changes, the proper affecting the workflow changes are going to come up on February 2nd. Unfortunately, yeah, obviously we would have loved to have them in for January 1st or even before January 1st. This specific batch of changes has only come to our attention in the last few weeks. So unfortunately, yeah, February 2nd was the earliest date we could possibly get them out for. Yeah, not ideal, but we kind of limited in what we could do there.
Yeah, and just a question from Claire there as well. It's just on basically tutors that don't complete their lessons and then they do it all at once. Will the client receive multiple emails or will they receive for each lesson? So at the moment, it would be for each lesson, basically when the tutor marks those as complete. As I mentioned, bulk emailing, bulk issuing those invoices from a tutor side is something that hopefully will consider rolling out, but just for the meantime, it would be as each lesson happens.
Yeah, so it's one email per lesson that they mark complete. Yeah, even if they're doing it at the same time.
Okay.
Guys, can I just add a quick reference, because I think some of these questions might relate to people working with schools. So I don't know how much people on this webinar know, but most people that work with schools and therefore probably doing group lessons are very likely to work under the employment business model, because the employment business model, the main disadvantage of the employment business model is the extra VAT, because VAT is now being added on to the tutors component of the fee. Obviously, schools can claim back VAT, so they won't care how much VAT you add, and presumably they will expect you to give prices excluding VAT. Obviously, we've given a lot of advice to TTA members on this, so I don't know how many people on the call are actually TTA members and maybe have been sent information about this or not, and some people perhaps haven't been sent any information. But obviously, we can provide some support on that. So if you are dealing with schools, the employment business model will probably be more appropriate for that. If it is lessons directly with multiple clients, but through the employment agency model, because you're doing it to consumers, then it might well be the case you still want to operate as an employment agency in that respect, because you don't want the consumers to add on the VAT. If that is the case, then the tutor is effectively billing each client themselves. They have to bill each client themselves through TutorCruncher. I don't know how TutorCruncher handles that, and I'm presuming that you guys will pick up and explain that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the tutors handling the invoices themselves are just the process we've described so far, which is when a lesson is marked as complete, we'll send we then ask the tutor at that point, do you want to send the invoice? Which I assume in most cases they're going to say yes to. In theory, they could say no to and delay it until a later date. I can't imagine that coming up too often. But yeah, and thank you for making for clarifying that point, especially in relation to schools. That kind of ties into what we were saying about the control on a per client level as to whether or not you want to interact with them as an employment business or employment agency. So in that example, I know a lot of companies that we work with they'll have a private section of their business, and then they will also have a separate section of their business where they work with schools directly. In that case, you're probably going to want to go into those schools' accounts before February 2nd and record on those accounts that you're going to be acting as an employment business in relation to them.
Yeah, and there's just another question there that I've seen, which is an interesting one. Basically, can you say to clients in January if they haven't supplied their card details that they can't have a lesson? That's a bit of a tricky one.
Yeah, we don't have a tool for that at the moment to say like withhold a lesson details or URL or booking or anything like that from someone based on whether or not they have their card details saved. One of the things we're looking at that probably won't be in this first batch of changes is giving companies a little bit more oversight over over who has card details saved and who doesn't, which might get some of the way towards addressing that as an issue. But a short answer, I'm afraid, is no. There's no way to disallow someone from attending a lesson without card details saved at the moment.
And this is another interesting question there. It's just relating to Pupil Premium as well for those EA model basically group lessons. So under the EA model for groups, Pupil Premium is now redundant. That I don't think is the case. You can still do student premium, am I right, on those group lessons if they're via split payment?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a terminology thing, and maybe we're cross purposes here, thinking of having different things in mind. From a TutorCruncher's perspective on the software side of things, we have a tool called Student Premium, which is what I assume and what I think Ben probably assumes this person is talking about, where you add an extra fee to for the tutor per student who attends the lesson. That's still fine, actually. It could be the case that this person is talking about something else, and I'm just filtering it through a lens of TutorCruncher, and that's all I can see now. But Student Premium should work fine with this. It shouldn't be affected.
But just to touch on that point, so again, Pupil Premium is being paid directly to schools to cover the schools providing work, and if the schools are paying, then they don't need to care about that because they're going to claim it back. So just to reiterate there, if you're working directly with schools, then it seems counterintuitive to try and use the employment agency approach, because the main disadvantage of the employment business approach is the extra VAT, and obviously schools won't care. So again, a bit more free advice for people. If you're working with schools, it's unlikely you want to do that through the employment agency model, because the main advantage of there's another couple of questions here on people that are saying it's going to be too easy for tutors to cut us out as an agency. I'm afraid the employment agency model, the changes that are required by law mean that is the case. That it would be easier operating legally under the changes. If you wanted to operate as an employment agency, it is easier for the tutors to cut out the clients. Now, if that cut out the agency and work directly with the client. Now, the main defense you have is your contracts with the clients. You don't have the right to chase after the tutors with this. You don't charge the tutors any money. The only people you have the right to chase with this are the clients. So if the client cuts out the agency and works direct with the tutor, whether it's the tutor's instigation or the client's instigation, doesn't matter. The only people which the agency can really pursue are the clients. And it's important you do that. As soon as someone starts going after a tutor, you start falling foul of lots of regulations and lots of rules. Just to the point where I don't think it's worth going through how bad it would be, because it's probably just a terrible idea. So please be careful. I mean, a lot of these rules are changing, and they are changing not necessarily in your favor. And that does mean that yes, it is in theory easier for tutors to cut you out or to understand what you're charging and to grumble about it potentially. But then that's if you don't want that to happen, then you can go to being an employment business. You charge VAT on the whole fee, and you can then say, well, we don't have to tell you how much we're charging, because it's a bit more like a complete supplier reseller relationship. You're reselling the tuition that somebody else is supplying you for an employment business, and they supply it to you, and you then supply it onwards. I hope that clarifies things. So I just wanted to add that, because I know there's a lot of questions coming up that are related to the same kinds of issues, and I can't type fast enough to address them. So,
I really appreciate those contributions, John. I'm absolutely certain that I'm not alone on the call. I'd say people are very thankful for you for sharing that kind of stuff. That is very helpful. Yeah,
And just to
I-
clarify, the
sorry.
employment business does not mean that your tutors are employed. This has come up at the last question here. An employment business does not mean that the tutors have to be employees. Okay, the employment and self-employment is a completely different test. They're not the same issue. Whether you're an employment agency or an employment business doesn't make a difference as to whether the tutors are employed or self-employed. Fiona, do you want me to explain that in just a little bit more detail?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah,
So
please.
if you're an employment agency, that means you introduce the tutor to the client. The tutor is then either employed or self-employed by the client. So the client engages them either as an employed person, like the client could literally pay them to be on their staff, unlikely for most cases, obviously, except for like perhaps homeschooling for very rich clients. Or they deal with tutors as a self-employed tutor. That's fine. If you're an employment business, the tutor can still be employed by you as the employment business, or self-employed, and you have a contract for services. There's two things in law. One is a contract of service, which is an employment contract, where someone literally turns up to work at the times you say, and you tell them what to do. Go and teach this person, whatever else. A contract for services is more like a business relationship where you say, I want someone to go off and do this tuition at this time and meet these specific criteria, deliver this service for me, please, either to me or to someone I designate. And that is where the tutor can then be self-employed. They fulfill the terms in the contract you give them. So it's totally separate. Being an EA or an EB does not determine whether the tutor is employed or not. Whether a tutor is employed or not depends on what's called supervision, direction, and control, or what's sometimes referred to as SDC. So supervision, direction, and control determines whether in practice a tutor is employed or under what's called deemed employment, where for tax reasons, HMRC regards them as being employed, and you're liable as a company to deduct PAY, to make the tax deductions at source, PAYE. Okay, so under EB, just to clarify, tutors can be self-employed, where you pay them yourselves the full gross amount and they pay their own tax, or they can be employed by you, 0 hours contract, part-time contract, full-time contract, up to you. Obviously, the TTA compliance pack does include contracts for all of these things. So if you want to get hold of that, then obviously email me. I'll put my email in the chat now a couple of times. It's john@thetutorsassociation.org.uk. But if those things are totally separate, so please don't confuse them, and don't think that because you're an employment business, you actually have to physically employ all of your tutors. It's not what it means.
Yeah, again, greatly appreciate that and very important clarifications to make. There are just a few more questions. I might just jump in here myself, Ben, if you don't mind, because I'm conscious that we're running on a bit. So the person who's asking about the student premium in TutorCruncher is asking who pays this, the agency or the client, if a student is absent in the group. So I guess the function of that student premium setting within TutorCruncher is just that obviously if the student attends, it gets added to the tutor's compensation for that lesson. And if the student is absent, then it doesn't get added. If we're in say a group lesson situation, I guess one student doesn't attend and therefore the tutor's pay is lower.
I think it just depends on whether or not the client is actually invoiced for that student attending or not, because that's pulls the premium, doesn't it, from if the client is charged. I think that's the case, yeah.
Sorry, I haven't understood.
No worries. I think with that student premium, I think that it's whether or not the student was attending on it or not, and it's chargeable. So if the student didn't attend, there's no charge to the client, so the tutor wouldn't get paid for them not attending.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. So it's just the case that, I mean, as with every lesson, we're just going to add up together the client's pay, whatever the clients have to pay, and then the tutor's payment. If it's split payments, we're going to divide their payment amongst the clients, and then your cut is going to be whatever the difference is. So yes, student premium should work fine with that as well. And where can you see if your account is employment agency or employment business? We have a question there as well. So we'll have a general setting for that in your settings where you set up your Stripe mitigation as to whether or not you want to also work as an employment agency. And then it's just a control on a client by client basis to say, for this client. Maybe this client is a school and will act as an EB, or this client is private and will act as an EA, or whatever classification you want to make for that.
Yeah, there was another question there as well. Can you, I think it was basically asking, can't email client for feedback. So I'm assuming this is either asking for reviews from clients or feedback on lessons. You can still do that, of course. You're providing a service, and yeah, you're more than entitled to ask the client for reviews or see how they're getting on. That's absolutely fine, no problem. I seen there was another question as well. Is TutorCruncher and the TTA available over the Christmas? We'll actually be shooting out probably an email over the coming week with our opening hours.
Yeah, actually. So over the Christmas period, obviously there are weekends and bank holidays. We're not in the office for them. There are only 3 working days when we'll have limited response. If something urgent comes up, we'll still have someone available to cover it. Those 3 working days are the 28th, 29th, and 30th. And other than that, if it's a working day, we're going to be in the office and we're going to be responsive. So yeah, that's the working hours. And just to further clarity on asking clients for reviews or anything else like that, that yeah, you have full control. You are allowed to have full control over the relationship, just not as far as it extends to billing. So you can manage the relationship, you can schedule lessons, you can do all that stuff that you normally do, unless it relates to billing, and that's when all of these necessary clarifications have to come in.
Just a clarity on that point as well. When you have feedback from clients, if you're an employment agency or employment business, it does determine there's a difference into what you can do when you've got that feedback. So if you're an employment agency, you're only there to make the introduction, in theory. And I guess I don't think you're breaking any law, strictly speaking, if you schedule the lessons, although technically speaking, you're not obliged to do that. But yeah, you can, and you might feel like you want to. But if you're an employment agency, you don't have any right to go off and tell the tutor what they should and shouldn't do at all. Don't forget, if you're an employment agency, legally speaking, the client is hiring the tutor directly, and you're not an intermediary, you're an introducer. You've introduced them, and now your job is, legally speaking, finished. So you can refer feedback back to the tutor, but you must make sure that it doesn't come across as though you're telling the tutor what to do. It's really, really important. Really important you don't do that. You must make sure that the tutor understands that, look, here's the feedback I've got from the client as the agency, and you can ask the tutor for their perspective, but that's where it stops. You can't tell the tutor, you've got to do this, or I suggest. You can perhaps give very loose suggestions, but you must not try and stray into trying to manage that relationship between the tutor and the client. It's the client's job to deal directly with the tutor if they're an employment agency. So if you're an employment business, it is a bit different because you are contracting directly with the tutor to deliver the services. So you can insist that the tutor meets the requirements in your contract with the tutor. Don't forget, if you're an employment agency, you don't have a contract in much of a sense directly with the tutor. You're just got an arrangement whereby you introduce them to people. So with the employment business relationship, you can insist that the tutor meets all of the requirements in the contract you have with them, and the contracts that we provide, and whether you've got those or you use your own ones is up to you, but the contracts that we provide include a provision that basically the tutor has to meet what's called the assignment details. And the assignment details basically is what you're expecting the tutor to do, what the tutors, when they're supposed to turn up and all that stuff. If you're an employment business, you're contracting with the client, you're the tutor, sorry, to go off and deliver the service to the client on your behalf. So you could insist that the tutor meets the requirements that you set out. You don't have that right if you're an employment agency. It's the client's job to enforce that right, and you can't go off and tell them that. You can't go off and tell the tutor, oh, you haven't followed the right rules. It's the client's job to go off and do that. So it's really, really important that that if you're an employment agency, you can say, right, here's some suggestions of what the client has told me, but you really have to stop there. If you're an employment business, you can insist that the tutor follows all the requirements of the contract they have with you, which basically says, if you say you've got to go off and teach Edexcel, IGCSE, that's what they've got to go off and do, and they're basically in breach of contract if they don't do that. A couple of other points that were sort of, I think they're relating directly to that. If you're an employment agency, you can't have term times, even if the teacher agrees them. I mean, the point is, if you're an employment agency, you're not delivering the service to the client. The tutor is delivering the service to the client. You're only making the introduction. So your term times mean sod all. Because if the tutor says, I don't go off those term times, the tutor's got a direct relationship with the client. That's why they have to bill separately. You've got a right, by virtue of being the introducer, to claim a fee. and that fee is probably going to be calculated as number of lessons times 20 quid or whatever it is, 30 quid, whatever you charge as your commission. So your term times mean naff all if you're an EA. If a tutor asks you for help with pedagogy, if a tutor asks you for advice and you give it, that's fine, but it has to be completely voluntary from the tutor's perspective. There can be no way in which you enforce your advice on the tutor. You can't make any threat or implication that there might be a threat if you're giving the tutor some suggestions or some advice. You can provide, under the employment agency or the employment business model, voluntary paid for services to the tutor. The tutor can buy training off of you if they want, but it has to be completely voluntary and completely separate from their being introduced to work. You can't say, oh, we're only going to introduce you if you come and get our training. You can't suggest that because that would be illegal, right? You can't say, oh, we're selling you our induction pack, because that implies that they need the induction in order to get work. And you're really going to be in trouble if you do that. So if you're an employment agency, you can sell tutors stuff separately as a separate relationship, totally separate, but it has to be totally 100% separate from the work you're doing when you're introducing them. As an employment business, again, if the tutors are self-employed, you're in the same kind of situation where any supervision, direction, control is illegal, because then they become into deemed employment. So you can you can give the tutors some suggestions, but they have to be genuinely 100% voluntary. And don't go away and try and cloak it and pretend that it's voluntary, but it's not really. Okay, like wink, wink, you have to do this or we won't give you any more jobs. Don't do that, because you're going to end up in a lot of trouble. I appreciate I've been talking for a bit there, but I hope that helps to clarify, because a lot of questions keep coming up down here. And the Osborne Clark pack does include all of the contracts for both EA and B, and it includes employment status guidance. And we've offered a bunch of webinars, and we'll probably offer a bunch more webinars to people to help make sure they understand exactly what they can and can't do, and all that. But yeah, sorry, Fionn, over to you.
No, absolutely. I really appreciate that. And it's good that you offer that clarity, because I do tend to fall into a software mindset. If someone says, can I ask for reviews? And I know within TutorCruncher will allow you to do that. I'm just going to say, yes, you can do reviews, but it's very helpful to have you, John, and just like be very clear about that, because you're absolutely right. One of the points that I would actually like to stress, which is related to this as well, is that you can't require tutors to use TutorCruncher split payments in order to process their invoices. That can't be a requirement, and you can't insist on it. Technically, the tutor has a choice over how to process that. What you can say, by my understanding, is, hey, look, we're welcome to the agency. We're going to try to introduce you to a client. We recommend that TutorCruncher split payments because it's a good system and we really like it and we think it's going to be super easy for you. If you have other priorities or whatever, you can let us know. But that's definitely the phrasing with which we expect people to go into this, rather than, hey, tutors, if you want to get work, you have to use this. So yeah, it's similar to the points John just made a moment ago.
Can I just address some of the questions popping up at the bottom, Fionn?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so can you post and market a job with set times and requirements? Yes, you can. If they're the client's requirements, you can set that. Obviously, the tutors then, if you make the introduction, it's completely between the tutor and the client as to whether they want to change the rate or the times between themselves. You don't have a right to intervene and stop that. If you don't have to, so you don't have to accept a tutor at their particular rate for a job in hand. So if you're an employment agency, remember, you're not accepting the tutor, you're introducing them. The client accepts the tutor. So you can not make the introduction because you don't think the tutor's going to offer a rate that's acceptable to the client. Well, I mean, you don't have to make an introduction anyway. You have no legal obligation to make an introduction, but you can decide who you introduce the tutor to, or who you introduce the client to, depending on which way around you want to say you're doing it. And you can basically say, look, if you're offering too much, I won't introduce you because I think the client will be upset, or whatever. But you can't start trying to enforce payment rates for tutors if you're an agency. It's really up to the tutor to say, I want to be paid this, and you can suggest that's a bit outside of the market rate, but you can't say we don't accept that rate. You're not the person accepting it. The client's the person accepting it. What about the middle category, i.e. workers, between employed and self-employed? So someone's getting very technical here. If you want to go down the road of having the technical road of having temporary workers, it does get a bit more complicated. There was a discussion that we had internally within TTA as to whether we try and support that. We didn't in the end go down that road. We just went down the road of having genuine full self-employment and genuine full employees. I think if you want to go down the road of having temporary workers, you just have to be careful, because now you really are treading a tightrope, and already there's a tightrope in terms of following the rules of the EA regulations. So if you are dealing with temporary workers, please make sure you get advice that you're really confident your contracts fully reflect exactly the relationship you're having, and make sure you really understand what the rules are around employment and self-employment. Can we have a 24-hour enforceable cancellation policy if the teacher agrees they want it? It's the teacher. The tutor has the cancellation policy if it's an employment agency relationship, because it's the tutor delivering the service. You're charging a fee calculated probably by hours times some rate, but it's the tutor that has the cancellation policy, and they can change it to whatever they want. They can have it has to be reasonable in order to be enforceable. But if they want to make the cancellation policy 1 hour, you've got no say against that if you're an employment agency. If you're an employment business, you set the cancellation policies what you want, but again, still has to be reasonable. Does being a worker change anything in terms of SDC or anything else? So being a worker is a very general term. I mean, EAS uses the term work seeker, which is anyone who wants to get a job, whether it's employee, whether they want to become self-employed, whether it's self-employed, they want business to be passed their way or anything like that. Does a worker so SDC is one of the key tests for whether somebody is employed or under what HMRC regards as deemed employment, which requires obviously NICs and tax deduction at source. But there are others. So, for example, the level of risk involved, the level of autonomy involved, and other things like that, more than we can probably discuss very briefly now. But you go and look up what genuine differences are between self-employment and employment, or we can discuss that separately. We support TTA members of that anyway. Can you clarify who things work when tutors don't use TutorCruncher? I'm not sure quite what the question means.
I assume they're going for how things would work if, assuming tutors didn't use TutorCruncher or split payments to process.
Yeah, well, the tutor is basically responsible for getting their money, and the agency is responsible for getting their money. So if you don't use TutorCruncher, you basically, as an agency, you're not allowed to touch the tutor's fee, but you can basically send an email to the client and say, you've had a lesson this month, or we think you've had a lesson this month, or the tutor's told us you've had a lesson this month. Please pay us our commission, 20 quid, 30 quid, whatever it is. The tutor then is responsible for going and getting their money separately. So TutorCruncher has basically just got a solution which makes it simpler by only making the client pay one link, and once they pay that one time, it distributes the money to both the agency and the tutor.
Just to further on that slightly, there will be tools in there are tools in TutorCruncher that you could use to administer that system. So if you wanted to, you'd probably be familiar with things like ad hoc charges. We could do like an ad hoc charge subscription. If you say you take a relationship with a client and you say, I'm going to charge you, I don't know, 200 quid a month because I made this introduction. We can make that work. I'm not going to go into details about it because it's not anyone's ideal scenario, I suppose. But just bear in mind that there should be solutions if you have to go down that road.
In terms of the cancellation policy, someone wanted to clarify, can we ask our teachers if they want to keep this 24-hour cancellation policy as their own, not ours? Can we still have TutorCruncher set to 24 hours cancellation? Yes, but it has to be that the tutor can change it, and I'm defer to TutorCruncher as to whether that's possible, but it should be, because if the tutor wants to say, actually, I want my cancellation period to be 48 hours, that's their choice.
So yeah, just to clarify from a TutorCruncher perspective, this batch of changes doesn't include changes to cancellation policy and an allowance to allow tutors to set their own personal cancellation policy. I can't give you any more information than that, I'm afraid, on this. I'm going to have a conversation with our MD after this and speak to him a bit about the cancellation policy point and get his perspective on it as well. That's all I can tell you for now, I'm afraid.
Client makes an inquiry, we introduce them to the tutor, we say the client is willing to pay £25. Do you want to take the job? Is it acceptable? Yeah, you can tell the tutor how much the client is willing to pay, or how much the client tells you they're willing to pay, but then it's just completely not your job to then negotiate on behalf of the tutor and the client. So once you've then made that introduction, the client and the tutor could agree on any different rate they like. And your fee is presumably calculated however you set out in the contract with the client. So if you set out in the contract with your client that your fee is a percentage, then your percentage will change if the tutor and the client agree on a different rate. If you set out in your engagement with the client that your fee is a set fee per hour of tuition delivered, then that's what it is. And if they agree a higher rate, then that doesn't change. And I assume the tutor can't change the commission rate that we get as a company. No, the tutor can't. You agree the commission with the client directly. You agree the commission with the client, and however that commission is calculated, the client decides if that's amenable to them, right? If you say your commission is 50% of whatever your tutor gets paid, and the client says, yeah, all right then, and then the tutor agrees to pay the client, the client agrees to pay the tutor £100 an hour, then you get 50 quid. If the client and the tutor agree to do it pro bono, you get nothing. But that's because that's how you calculated it.
Yeah. And yeah, just to say from
Anyway.
TutorCruncher as well, as we said before, tutors have no oversight over what you're charging the client. So that's, as John said, it's entirely your relationship. They're not going to see that amount. They're not going to have any control over that. It's not relevant to them. So you don't have to worry about that aspect of it. Perfect. Thanks for that, John. It's been great having you on the call. I'm sure everyone really appreciates it. I think we've gotten through quite a lot of that, really. Yeah, I think I don't know if there's any other quick questions that people want to fire in. So yeah, tutors being able to change the rate on TC. We don't currently have. They type into a box right now and set their own rate. That would just have to be in conversation with you. So yeah, we don't have a box for them to type that in. But as John said, it is their rate to set in conversation with you. Does the fee have to be presented as the teacher's fee solely, and then we have to inform the client separately of our commission? So from
yes. Yes. If you're an employment agency, you need to make sure that the client needs to be able to look at who's charging them what. You can't pretend they're paying one person. Otherwise, you'll be big red letters. No. Okay. You've got to say the client has to be sent both invoices. They have to see the invoice from the tutor and the invoice from you as the agency. They have to see that they've got both invoices and they're paying both people, because they've got a legal relationship with both people as the client. Okay, they're paying the tutor on one hand and the client and the agency their commission on the other, and they have to be able to see that, and you can't try and hide it from them, and TutorCruncher won't hide it from them. Okay, 100%, really important.
That's right. And just to reiterate that as to the nuts and bolts of the things again, that information will be presented on the PDF. And as I said, when that email goes out, which details the charge, that PDF is going to be available either by letting the client log in to view it, or by it being attached to the email, or by there being a link on the email. If you turn off the other two options, we'll put a link on the email to say, click this link, and it'll bring them to a web page where we'll just show them the thing without them having to log in, show them the invoice, the PDF breakdown.
Yeah, I just want to add to that as well, Fiona, because this might be a relevant question for some people that have custom templates and stuff like that. For split payments, those invoices, there'll be little or no editing, or you can't create custom HTML templates to hide certain information. Those will be there by default to ensure that you're above board and all that information is there pretty much.
Yeah, so that applies to both the PDF itself, which you might be used to being able to edit it on TutorCruncher. That doesn't apply to this new PDF for the split payments invoice if you're acting as an employment agency. It also doesn't apply to the email definition. So you couldn't go in and write your own email definition and you exclude the part where you ask them to log in, or where there's a button to click through to the PDF. So yeah, both of those will be tightly controlled. As things stand at the moment, we're not making edits to them. They kind of are as they are. If you have issues or points about them or things that you'd like to be changed, obviously that don't impact any of the necessary precautions that we have to take around showing the correct information, you're very welcome to send them through. We'll absolutely take them to heart. And it might be that we roll out something where we could make individual changes on a case-by-case basis. But for the time being, it's safe to assume no changes are going to be made to them. So let me just have a look through these last questions. A question about TTA membership. I'll let John come back to that. Or as he said, you can contact him directly. You have the email in the chat. And it's just the Tutors Association. So if the tutor comes to our center to tutor but is self-employed, is that an employment business? So self-employed versus employed, as John said earlier on, not a consideration to have in relation to this discussion. This is not employment agency or employment business, doesn't determine whether your tutors are self-employed versus employed. It's just about what you consider your revenue to be. Do you consider your revenue to be only the commission amount, or do you consider it to be the full amount of each lesson? Employment agency considers the commission, employment business is the full amount. Whether or not you work with self-employed tutors or employed tutors, it doesn't factor in. So just reading through these last couple, we realize the PDF will indicate the commission, but for all our present clients, do we now have to email them and say we are taking X amount of commission? I guess potentially more of a point for John. I'm not aware of any requirement for a separate email to disclose, oh, you're working with us, and by the way, in future when charges come off, this charge is going to go here and that's charge. That's not something I've come across as a requirement.
Look, I think a lot of this is about commercial viability, right? You should assume if you're going to be an employment agency, the client is going to find out what your commission is. It's probably better that they find out from you than they find out from clicking through the links and then finding it out themselves. So whilst there's no rules specifically stipulating that you have to go and announce it from the rooftops or anything like this, if you're going to be an employment agency, it's highly likely that you'll want to tell them, because if they find out themselves, and they will find out, because it will have to be really, really clear on the TutorCruncher emails they get sent. They will have somewhere where they can literally just be like, click here to view your invoices, and it will make it clear, and the wording on those emails will make it clear that they're being sent an invoice from the tutor and from the agency, both lumped together. So they will probably get curious and look at that. And it's probably better that you've explained to them and justified to them why you're charging a commission in the first place, than they go and find that out for themselves and go, oh my goodness, I'm really shocked. So it's just about, I think it's just about general business sense. You're not going to be able to hide it from them. If you want to be an employment agency, you're not going to be able to hide it from them. So you're going to have to come clean and say, and I think you're probably just better off doing it in the first place, but it's completely your choice. Hide it from them and see what happens when they find out if you want, but that's up to you. How much is TTA membership for a limited company? So it depends on your revenue, but between £240 a year to £550 a year, based on the size of your company. If a tutor comes to our centre to tutor but is self-employed, is that an EB? Probably yes. If a tutor is coming to your centre, then you're probably paying them to turn up there at certain times, rather than the clients paying them to turn up there at certain times. It's conceivably possible to have a centre model where you literally supply a centre and you say, well, that's why we're charging commission, partly because we're supplying the premises where the tuition happens, and the tutor turns up and the client pays the tutor direct, basically, to turn up and do the tuition. So it doesn't, just having a centre doesn't mean that you definitely have to be an EB, but it means it's probably more likely in practice. Again, if you're a member of TTA, come talk to us. We'll be able to discuss it with you in more detail. And can a tutor be in my employment agency and in my employment business due to private and schoolwork? Yes, you can have tutors doing some work under an employment agency relationship and work under an employment business relationship. Just make sure you're super, super clear and transparent with the tutor and with clients as to which one is which. I would literally put it in plain language at the top of the email that this assignment is where we are introducing you as an employment agency, or this assignment is where we are contracting with you to deliver the tuition as an employment business. Be super, super clear. Don't fudge it or just pretend that they're going to know, because this is the niceties of this kind of area of law are not really what most tutors are going to be so super enthusiastic about. But if anyone then investigates it and your tutor gets it wrong and says the wrong thing, it's just going to be an enormous amount of pain for you, because then you'll get investigations extended, or you'll start getting like labor market orders and all this kind of stuff, which you just don't really want. So make sure that you're really clear with the tutors. This is what you're doing as when we're working as an employment agency. We're introducing you to a client who you're going to work for directly, and this is employment business. Obviously, we provide, for the people that subscribe to the compliance pack, we provide all the documentation that then backs that up in practice. And obviously how you treat the tutors has to follow that as well, because otherwise HMRC will still have you over a barrel if you do it the wrong way. But yes, you can do both. Just be really careful about, be really transparent with the tutor about which one is which, and be really clear in your accounting, because obviously the employment agency, your fee is only the commission, whereas employment business, you're taking the full fee from the client and then paying a self-employed or an employed tutor to deliver that work. Sorry again, Fiona, I took a bit more time there, but
no, yeah, no problem at all. It's fantastic to have your contributions. Absolutely.
Can you still have a contract with your tutors as an EA? Not really. You do in a way, but we have a separate terms of use of website document, which basically acts as a terms of engagement that says all the stuff around we introduce tutors to clients. If you're on our website and you're sort of registering with us, then you accept that you're going to basically, we might introduce you to people, we might not. You have a contract of sorts, but you don't directly have a relationship. You don't have much of a legal relationship directly with the tutors. You don't have many obligations to them, and they don't have many obligations to you. Who are Osborne Clark? Osborne Clark are a legal firm who specialize in employment law and in dealing with EAS. So yeah, that's fine. Or a terms of engagement. Guessing that relates to the previous question around contract with tutors. So yes, we do. The compliance pack that we've produced has got all of the stuff for employment agencies to have terms of use of the website, which are basically terms of engagement. Does the pack mention TutorCruncher and Stripe Express? Doesn't need to. It doesn't need to, and we've got confirmation in writing and in public from EAS that TutorCruncher's solution is fine within certain boundaries. We obviously work closely with TutorCruncher, hence I'm here to make sure that TutorCruncher know exactly what to do and how to get it right. We then provide separately support to members. So if you're a member, you'll get more support from us and more guidance anyway. The contracts themselves don't stipulate exactly how the tutor is going to get paid, because the tutor is going to be able to decide that for themselves if you're an employment agency. So we don't write that into the contract, but it's absolutely fine, and the contracts are completely compliant with that. As an employment agency, can we call ourselves a school on our website if 20% of our business in EB music workshops? It depends what you think calling yourself a school means and what you feel, what kind of impression it gives to parents. You shouldn't do anything which is misleading. I don't even know if you're a TTA member or not. If you're not a TTA member, you do what you like, and if you get sued for it, then it's your problem. But if you're a TTA member, then we would insist that you don't do things that are misleading to clients, and you'd follow our code of practice, which relates to that. I don't think it's advisable that you call yourself a school. So it depends really if there's a very strong reason for why you're doing that. But school might have connotations that parents find misleading if you're operating as an employment agency, because you're literally just introducing them to people, which is not really what schools normally do. So I would suggest probably not, but again, it's not a cast iron advice for you. You just have to come up with your own solution. Ofsted registered childcare setting under the terms of an EB. Do we still need to be VAT registered? You have to be VAT registered regardless of what you do. If your revenue for your company is above the threshold, which is £85,000 of VATable income, and it is VATable income if it's tuition, unless I think John is going to fly down after school. If only I could. You don't understand. That's not how it works for me, I'm afraid, but you're very kind. Yeah, I think we've got to the end of the questions.
Absolutely, and yeah, I completely second that. Any lie down you do get, if and when, is going to be very well deserved. Perfect. All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming along. Thanks, obviously, especially to John, who massively stepped in. Yeah, as I said, we'll be posting the recording of this online. We'll shoot out an email afterwards. We'll stick it on YouTube or something like that. And yeah, obviously there'll be more questions that come up as we go on with all of this, but it's good to get the opportunity to hash out some of the most important ones on this. Yeah, so I hope you have a lovely day. Thanks so much again to John. Thanks to Ben, John, as well, who was great.
Thanks, Ben.
And yeah, hope you all have a lovely day and have a lovely Christmas.
Take it easy, everyone. Thanks, John.
All the best.